Hey everyone, welcome back to Guitars, Whiskey, and Golf. My name is Brian. Thanks for joining me today in my whiskey laboratory. So today we've got another in-depth whiskey review of Booker's. And one of the things we'll get into discussing is Booker's still worth it from a value standpoint? Booker's, retails now for about $100. It's gotten a lot more expensive. Um, and the question is it still a good value? Is it still worth it? If you take something like Knob Creek 9-year-old single barrel, the 120 proof version, that's a Jim Beam product also. It's 9 years old, it's 120 proof, it's about $55. Booker's is aged between 7 and 8 years old. The proof point is generally around 120 to 126, and it's double the price. So the question becomes, is Booker's still worth it? And as we get into discussing this whiskey, maybe we'll hit on some things that'll help you decide whether it's worth it for you. So first of all, what is Booker's? Who is Booker? Well, Booker's is named after Booker No. Booker No is the grandson of the Jim Beam. So he's a direct descendant of the Jim Beam. And Booker No was the master distiller for Jim Beam for about 35 years. Another important feature of Booker No is that he invented the concept of the small batch whiskey. Small batch whiskey meaning it's not a single barrel, it's not whiskey coming from one barrel, but it's also not a mass-produced whiskey that is a blend of hundreds and hundreds and maybe even thousands of barrels. So the original concept of a small batch whiskey by Booker No was to take select barrels and blend them to create a flavor profile that they thought was exceptional. So Booker No is credited with essentially inventing the concept of the small batch bourbon. And like I said, he's a direct descendant of Jim Beam himself. Worked as the master distiller at Jim Beam for 35 years. So right off the bat, from a value standpoint, when you buy a bottle of Booker's, you're buying into that history. You're buying into the Booker No legacy and what he means to the bourbon world. So I think that that's worth something for sure. You also get these handmade boxes that the bottle comes in, which is really cool. So this is the Lumberyard batch, and Lumberyard. What's that mean? So the Lumberyard batch is named after Booker No's pre-distillery work history, where he worked at a lumberyard as a teenager. And Booker No had a notorious work ethic, really hardworking guy. And so this bottle kind of pays homage to his work ethic and his pre-distilling years working at a lumberyard, which is also really cool. With every bottle of Booker's, you get a little story card that goes into the history of this particular batch. And then the back of the card also goes into telling you all about how this batch is made up of. What percentages of each barrel and from which part of the warehouse is going into this batch. So you get a lot of detailed information on what goes into this batch, a little information about why they named it this, the Lumberyard batch. And there are many, many different batches of Booker's, as we know. You've got Country Ham, Kentucky Tea, all these. Right now, the most recent version of Booker's, I believe, is called Charlie's Batch. And that batch is named after the guy that actually makes these boxes. So you know what? There is all sorts of cool things about Booker's. Booker No, the person himself, and the history of Jim Beam. And like I said, to some extent, when you buy a bottle of Booker's, you're buying into all that. So this box is really cool. You've got Booker's etched into the side. You got a picture right back here of Booker No sitting on the porch with his Kentucky Tea, which was tea mixed with a little bourbon. So, it's really cool. The history of bourbon in America is really cool. The history of Jim Beam and Jim Beam products is really cool. So let's get into it. Let's taste this. Really cool collector box. The bottle itself is beautiful. It's almost like a wine bottle, really, when you look at it. This particular batch is aged 7 years, 1 month, and 7 days, and the proof point is 124.8. Excuse me. So, like I said, it's just slightly higher than the Knob Creek single barrel, but it's aged virtually 2 years less than that Knob Creek. And by the way, that Knob Creek single barrel is a tremendous whiskey. And I plan on doing a video in the future, in the near future actually, doing a blind tasting of the Knob Creek single barrel next to the Booker's to see what's better and can I tell the difference. All right. So let's get into the nosing. The distinctive nutty profile of Jim Beam products. Now, whether that's Jim Beam products itself or whether that's Knob Creek, whether it's Booker's, the distinctive nuttiness is personally something that I want in a Jim Beam product. I love that nutty, peanutty flavor profile. And when I drink a Jim Beam product, I want that flavor profile. So if a nutty bourbon is something that turns you off, then this is definitely not going to be something for you. I'm also getting, for sure, cinnamon. I'm getting a little bit of like dark fruit. It's not a tremendously complex nose. I'm getting, peanut butter. I'm getting some dark fruit notes, almost maybe like a sour cherry. Definitely some spiciness. Let's get into the taste. That's delicious. Getting a Kentucky hug right now, so I can feel the proof. There is like almost a peanut butter quality to this. And it goes in waves. Sometimes you get it on the nose, and then sometimes, well, you're like, where is it? I'm not getting it. Then it comes back. Same thing with the palate. Sometimes you get a wave of that peanut butter characteristic, and then maybe it drifts off. There is a kind of sour cherry element to this, in my opinion. So it's not like a sweet cherry or a sweet fruit. It's almost like sour cherry compote. Like if you took a bunch of sour cherries, some sugar, and then cooked it over the stove and got that kind of sour, deep, fruity element, sour cherry. There's some people call it the Beam Funk or the Knob Creek Funk, and that's how I would describe that. It's a combination of peanut, sour cherry, oak, and those flavors blended together. I call the Beam Funk or the Kentucky the Knob Creek Funk, and it just happens to be something that I love. So I'm a Knob Creek fan. I'm a Booker's fan. I personally don't feel like this batch disappoints. Uh, just getting a lot of peanut. The oak is a little bit spicy, but also balanced with that sour cherry kind of fruit note. So the oak is not drying at all. It's kind of a sweet oak with a little bit of spice and that sour cherry. Look, I think it's a delicious bourbon. The question then becomes, like I said, is it worth 100 or 110 bucks? Um, you may be able to find Booker's in your area for a little cheaper. I doubt you're going to be able to find it for much cheaper than 100 bucks, but maybe you can. I don't know. In my area, I see Booker's for as much as $200. So when I see a Booker's out in the wild for 100 bucks, I grab it because, to me, that's like half price. Because like I said, the prices that some of these liquor stores are trying to get for Booker's is crazy. I would not pay 200 bucks for this. But this is a delicious bourbon. The finish is still going. The proof point, the Kentucky hug, it's still working its way kind of down my palate, down into my chest. Super enjoyable. Yeah, it's such a good bourbon. But listen, Booker's is what it is. I think sometimes people with Booker's, they're searching for all these complex notes because it's expensive. And so they want to search for all these incredible flavors and layers and depths and things like that. And the bottom line is that when Jim Beam makes a Booker's, there is a flavor profile that they're trying to build, and it's nutty. There's usually a little bit of a fruit component. There's some beautiful sweet oak, and that's what makes kind of a beautiful bourbon, right? A little bit of sweetness, a little bit of fruit, a little bit of oak. And sometimes we're chasing all these flavors that just aren't there. But this is a beautiful bourbon. I think that at the end of the day, you're buying into the story of Booker No, his historical place in bourbon, who he is to the bourbon world. Like I said, the creator of small batch bourbon. So listen, I'm not going to necessarily chase every batch of Booker's. If I happen to hear good things about a batch, something a little special, then I'll probably chase that one. I don't need to necessarily have every batch of Booker's. So with that, I'll leave you. I think it's a tremendous bourbon. It has all the flavor components that you want in a Booker's. For me, it's worth it if you can get it for around 100 bucks, something like that. I probably wouldn't chase it once it gets into that 150 range. I don't think it's worth it at that point. But at that price point, with the historical nature and the collector box that you get with your Booker's, and you can save your batch cards, it's worth it, because it becomes a good story. So that's it for me. Thanks for joining Guitars, Whiskey, and Golf. Appreciate you subscribing to the channel and joining the community. Thanks a lot.